Here, I'll throw on my jacket so I feel like I know what I'm talking about.
The jacket makes the
The jacket makes the attorney, right? I didn't have my tie today.
Are we live? Okay, guys.
My skinny tie.
All right, welcome out to Cake. Thanks for coming out, everyone. Good to see you again, and hey, you viewers live. So yeah, we'll be filming live. We filmed the talk and then the workshop portion afterwards. Everything in between is off the record. Yeah, we're totally donation based. So feel free to toss in a few ducats as well. And same online, we have a donate via PayPal button. So every week at Cake, we've been getting together since the first Wednesday of this year, and every Wednesday since. And we get together and pretty much just discuss a lot of down and dirty, kind of immediately actionable ways of improving your business. And hopefully things that you can do with 1 to 3 hours just once you get home from this to immediately increase your sales or get more customers or whatever it is you're trying to get better at. And this week we have a great speaker coming out, Matthew. Who is a regular caker now also, and he's going to be talking about crowdfunding and what that looks like from a few different sources, things like Kickstarter, down to new things in place to get equity funding from crowds as well. So without further ado, I guess thank you and welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Graham. So I'm Matthew Abts. My website's OregonStartup.com. I guess I should start this with, 3 warnings. I think I'll issue first. 1, this talk is going to be about ways to get. Don't worry, I'll get to my lawyer's disclaimer. You know that's one of the warnings. But first, this whole talk is going to be about ways to get cash, okay? So let me issue the warning. I think everybody here is already, fairly well established or has their business ideas or knows what they want to do, or is actually, already successful in what they're doing with their business product. But for those of you who just have the idea and you want the cash to kind of fund the idea, just bear in mind that you really want to double check that business plan, okay? So if you just have an idea and you think that if you throw money at it, you're going to make money, it's probably not going to work. Anytime I've ever thrown money at something in my life, it's really just taken my money and kind of run away with it, and then I've never seen my money again. So make sure you have a solid business plan first. You can refer back to old archived cakes, I think, and you can get some more on how to do good, solid business plans. Just have a look at that stuff. Second, my lawyer's disclaimer. I am not the attorney for anybody who's listening to this talk, whether it's on the web or right here. We haven't signed a retainer agreement. Well, maybe I have with a couple people in the room, in which case you are my client. But otherwise, we haven't signed a retainer agreement. I'm not your attorney. And the advice I'm going to give tonight is not legal advice. For legal advice, you need to give me a whole bunch of facts. I need to do a whole bunch of research. Then I need to sit down and write out a big formal letter stating legal opinion. Okay, so even if I answer questions tonight, whether it's from folks in the audience or on the web, it's not legal advice, and if you want legal advice, a good, thorough, researched opinion that you can rely on, just send me an email, OregonStartup.com, and I'll research your question. Okay. Finally, my third warning, this is still kind of a prototype talk. Actually, this is the first time I've ever given this talk or any talk like it. In fact, the law I'm going to talk about tonight, the Jobs Act, or the McGee Act, was only passed in April of this year, so it's pretty much a brand new law, too. So, thanks to the Cake folks for letting me come out and use me as guinea pigs. I have a sheet of notes, which I will try not to refer to too much. I'm not even sure where it starts. So I spent an hour before coming here to do this talk, and I started writing a bunch of other notes on top of my notes in pencil, which is never really a good sign. And as a prototype talk, if I start swearing or throwing an inappropriate word, just forgive me. I used to be a private investigator, and I also used to be a truck driver. And it's before I got into law school. This is many, many years ago, 10 or so years ago, although I'm very proud of my old profession that let me see a lot of the country. It also left me with kind of a potty mouth, for which I blame, in case we have any viewers who are familiar with Texas, Laredo, Texas, if you've ever been there. That's a great part of my potty mouth, which has gotten me in trouble in the past. I don't want to digress too much. One time I did a First Amendment talk for a bunch of people, for some high school students, because I like teaching basic legal rights to high school students. It's one of the things I enjoy volunteering for. So I've done First Amendment talks and other constitutional right talks and tort talks and things like that. I did this First Amendment talk where I started using swear words, and the teacher had to, nix me out. It's nothing that the 16, 17-year-olds hadn't heard before, I'm sure, but still. Forgive me if I go off on a bit of a tangent. So, I think I want to start out tonight, and this is kind of meant to be overall a kind of basic legal talk about crowdfunding, more from the legal perspective. I want to make sure everybody knows the vocabulary. I want to make you all sound smarter and be more educated consumers of these kind of products. It's like when you go to the mechanic, right? And you know that you're talking about your radiator, and instead of saying, oh, that thing that makes my car cool is leaking from underneath. Instead you say, oh, I think my heater core is leaking. Can you just give me a bypass instead of, pulling the thing out? You're going to save yourself like $600 or $800 or however much they're charging in labor fees. So being an educated consumer. So I want to give folks that vocabulary. I think since it's a prototype talk, I want to treat this a little bit more like a class than just like a presentation. One, because I like teaching more than I like speaking, but also because we're kind of a small group here, and if I say something that's confusing, I also want to get some feedback on it so I can help improve this for when inevitably I actually do more of a public speaking in front of big crowds with big PowerPoint presentations and things like that. So if you have questions.
I have a question.
Shoot.
On a First
If it's a bathroom pass, you don't need to ask me that kind of question. It's
on
okay.
the First Amendment talk, shouldn't you have just gone ahead and swore because that's your First Amendment right?
I used that example, but the teacher didn't buy it. She wasn't having any of it. She's like, it doesn't matter. And she actually raised the fact that in schools you have, fewer rights to express yourself if you're a kid in schools, which, I don't necessarily like. But then remember the Bong Hits for Jesus case?
Yeah, Bong Hits for Jesus.
Bong Hits for Jesus.
I have a drink menu. Okay.
So let's start by getting on the same page for vocabulary. And, nobody's kids here, and I hope nobody watching, but if they are, kids, don't drink and listen to legal stuff. It's not a good idea.
They go to the expensive champagne. I'm good.
So with vocabulary, let's start by making sure everybody understands the difference in ways you get capital. Some of the vocabulary like venture capitalist, okay, and angel investor, and crowdsourcing, and micro-lending, and private equity. What are the differences between all these things? Well, when we're talking about who's investing, what we really come down to, the way it was explained to me is who you're swimming with, okay? And you've probably heard this example where you're swimming with the fishes, or you're swimming with the sharks. Or the case of angel investors, are you swimming with dolphins who are just occasionally a little sexually aggressive, all right? It's more kind of, the angels are supposed to be more mentors than the VCs, but sometimes it gets a little violent and ugly along the way. I don't mean to offend any angels out there. Please give people money. You're doing great work. Love you. Sometimes it depends. But who you want to swim with when you can is always with the fishes, which is a lot of what crowdsourcing is about. So let's distinguish crowdsourcing from crowdfunding. Crowdsourcing, these are actual definitions of these words that are pretty much commonly accepted. And if you go and you read like legal treatises or academic treatises, these are the definitions. In actual practical usage, you're going to hear people mixing up crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, microlending, back and forth. But so you know the difference. Crowdsourcing is, let's say, it focuses on who you're getting to give you money rather than what they're giving you money for. So let's say you want to throw a birthday party for your nephew or something, all right? You have a whole bunch of people. You send out cards, or you make phone calls like to all the aunts, all the uncles, all the friends. Would you chip in $5 to help me out with the birthday party? Great. That's crowdsourcing. You just got a little bit of money from a lot of people to help you with the birthday party. How about like high school graduation, okay? It's like you send a little letter, oh, Timmy, he's 6'4" now, you haven't seen him in 10 years, but he's graduating high school, so give me $20 to help for his high school graduation. That's every year, my graduation. So that's crowdsourcing. You could take that same example and turn it around and say, okay, well, I'm starting my business, I need help to get my prototype product out the door. The manufacturers, hopefully all of you know that there's good light manufacturer here in Oregon and Portland too.
You're banging on the table.
Oh, am I? I do
Freaking
that.
a few people out online.
Oh, I'm sorry. I bang and I talk fast.
Move
Both.
away from the table.
So, God, stop me. So that's crowdsourcing, and you can apply to a company too if you need that money. You're just asking your friends and family. Swimming with the fishes, crowdsourcing. Micro-lending, a little bit different, a little bit more professional. Take, for example, Mercy Corps Northwest here in the Portland area. Maybe some people are familiar with this organization. Love Mercy Corps. They will actually give microloans, very small amounts. I think it's under $20,000, maybe under $10,000, to small businesses starting up. I've got a couple of clients, for example, who have criminal records for things they did long ago in the past. They've long served their time or their sentences for misdemeanor, or maybe served no sentence and just did community service, but now they have like shoplifting from when they were 19 on their record. And in our current hiring environment, it makes it really hard to get a job, right? So they went and they started their own business and doing pretty well. But it's also hard to get a loan, and it's even worse getting a loan when you have bad credit. Micro-lending sometimes can step into that gap, and that's one of the things Mercy Corps Northwest does, and I love them for it. But microlending also covers other things. For example, anybody remember Kiva? Okay, Kiva was this great thing where, you just go and you give money to these needy people. Excuse me, is. And and they're usually often in foreign countries, and they want to have a chicken coop, or they want to start a banking cell phone service, or just all sorts of stuff. And the money actually goes to field agents, I think, who then kind of work with who they're giving the money to. And there was a kind of a scandal about how it goes to the field agents and what the field agents were doing, but they overcame that. So Kiva might be another example of microlending. Now we take those two ideas and kind of mush them and combine them together, where you have business lending, but from a crowd, and you get crowdfunding. So it takes not just the who you're getting money from, but also the purpose, which is a commercial purpose. And when you have both of those elements locked in, then you have crowdfunding. This is also why Kickstarter is not technically crowdfunding. It's actually, they call it backing a project, right? So it's actually more like crowd backing, whatever you want to call it, instead of, say, crowd funding. There you go, crowd supporting works too. You can throw a bunch of words at it, and it just makes more sense than crowdfunding. And we make that distinction because when we say crowdfunding, and we have that idea of lending, like micro-lending in there, especially when it's not for a nonprofit. I think Kiva's a nonprofit, and rather than actually get any expectation of return, you just get your capital back or your investment cost back. When it's crowdfunding, it raises securities concerns. So let me get to a definition which I've actually written down here. Investment securities. Okay, the definition is you invest money in common enterprise with the expectation of profit solely from others' effort. What does that mean in English? It means you give somebody money with the idea that they're going to use it to make money for you. Okay, that's a security. That's the federal law definition. Washington, California, Oregon all have, in fact, looser definitions, state definitions of what is a security. So really a lot of stuff fits into a security, but you need to make money. It includes debt financing in a lot of cases. How many people are familiar with, what was this one called? Prosper. I think I was a Prosper investor back in the day as well. They ended up with some pretty big SEC problems because essentially what they were doing is Prosper was micro-lending to people sometimes in your neighborhood or people far away, where you just take some of your own cash and then you'd lend it at an interest rate that's like 10, 16%, whatever, get some money back, but that's a security because you're making interest on it. So the SEC told them to stop. And, there was a big lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, and I think they're still around today, but now they actually register the securities with the SEC, and they've set it up a little bit differently. Just kind of a technical point, they've made kind of a little kind of bank or micro-lending institution of some sort, and now you actually deal with notes that are written by that micro-lending institute. And the reason, or the micro-lending institution, because the reason is that way they can do one filing with the SEC. It's kind of a portfolio of all the notes they've written, as opposed to having to file with the SEC registrations for every single one of those securities, which costs a ridiculous amount of money. If you need to actually register your securities, you're looking at like $50,000 or something like that, more. It's mostly for attorneys, CPAs, things of that nature, than it is necessarily the fees for the security itself. But those are some substantial fees sometimes as well. Oh, this?
I don't need. Oh, you're still eating?
I'm still eating. Don't worry, I'll finish my Reuben later. I will. We had to stop to actually, do the talk we were scheduled to do tonight. I apologize to any vegetarians. Maybe I should just, sneak this out of the camera area in case we have any vegetarians who don't like to see that. Reuben sitting there. I apologize. I admit I eat meat. It's just my background.
Blame it on Texas.
Blame it on Texas. Blame it on Laredo, I guess. So, ordinarily I don't like spending a lot of time talking about the history of stuff, and you're not really here to hear about the history. You're here to hear about some of the requirements, maybe for if you want to set up to get crowdfunding for equity, and we'll get there in just a second. But the history goes through these things like Kiva and like Prosper, and the Dodd-Frank Act, which passed a little while ago. One of the things it was meant to do was try and fix how we'd kind of deregulated everything, in the 90s and early 2000s. Remember the whole Clinton era deregulation? A lot of it was done during the Clinton era, which, people say partially caused our whole economic problem. Then we had the Dodd-Frank come out, which is supposed to address this. And actually, one little note in the Dodd-Frank Act was that they wanted a study done, I think it was by the SEC, or Congress just said, we want a study done about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding and microlending in the state of affairs. So that was done. And a lot of academics started doing reports on the subject and discussing how we have a huge problem with small business capital. So small business, as I think most of the people here know, small business accounts for, if you look at the amount of private GDP in the country, okay, not GDP from public sources like government or whatever, it's like 50%. For employment, it's certainly more than 50%. Small businesses is really the economic driver, yet 90% of investment does not really go to small business, especially small local business. So one of the ideas here is, how do we fix the system? Remember, decades ago, back in the New Deal era, don't worry, I'm not going to spend much time going back that far. This all starts back when Napoleon. No, it all comes from the French Revolution ultimately, in the bourgeoisie. The idea was we used to have stock exchanges all across the nation, and honestly, they didn't function all that well because there was way too much hucksterism, way too much fraud, and part of the New Deal was fixing all that by kind of getting rid of that, putting in a lot of regulation, and fixing a lot of those systemic problems. And now, April 5th, I think, I should have written that down somewhere. April 5th, 2012, we passed the Jobs Act, which actually deregulates, again, some investing. It actually takes the cap off a lot of the loan limits that you can get as a small business. It opens up equity crowdfunding entirely. And what a lot of us are hoping it's going to do is open up the idea of local investing again, where you're going to have crowdfunding portals, which we'll get to in a minute, which will support putting money into local businesses. And that's a pretty realistic goal, and it's a pretty realistic idea, and it's probably what's going to happen. And a lot of crowdfunding portals are already kind of aiming for that idea. But, I'm hitting the table again, all right.
Must be reading my mind.
But what it does is deregulate. And a lot of people are nervous about that kind of deregulation. I'm not going to really focus on that very much. One of the things Congress looked at, actually there's a good, let me give an academic note. The SEC, on the SEC website, has a report written by, that I like. I mean, this is just one of many, many reports, but this is one I like. And it's by a guy called Bradford, Professor Bradford. I think he's from one of the law schools in Nebraska. And he wrote a really nice, long kind of report on the state of affairs prior to the Jobs Act about these kind of investments, such as micro-lending and crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. If you have a chance and you're more of an academic bent, go read it. It's several pages and it's kind of legalese and in some ways dense, but it's a lot of fun if you enjoy that kind of thing. And I know we at least have a couple lawyers somewhere out there in web space, so I figured I'd throw that out to them. But Congress looked, and they saw that, in fact, equity crowdfunding is actually done right now in Europe. So let me break that apart for you a little bit more. I think I jumped a step there. We have right now crowdfunding that works in a lot of different ways that, like I said, isn't really crowdfunding. It's crowd backing or crowd supporting or whatever you want to call it. And it's more about donations and pre-purchases. Okay, that's most of the models are, in fact, pre-purchases. They're not donations. If you want to do a donation, really technically, you need to be giving money to, say, a nonprofit of some sort. It doesn't even need to be an IRS nonprofit like a 501c3 or something. That doesn't necessarily matter. It matters if you want to get it as a tax deduction, okay? But it doesn't matter if you just want to give money to some. There are plenty of state nonprofits that never get IRS status. So we have a number of, and here I'm going to go to my notes, a number of different models that I've started. There's the Kickstarter model, which is supposedly more for the arts, although we're seeing a lot more product designs on Kickstarter now. And it's kind of an all or nothing model, right, where you say, I want $5,000 or $10,000, and if you don't get it, you don't get any of it. And it's really a pre-purchase. Even though they often use the word donation with it, not so much. It's really more of a pre-purchase because you get these rewards and expectation of reward when you really sign up for Kickstarter. And I've never seen a Kickstarter that does not have some sort of reward system set up. Maybe out there I haven't seen it. There are other models. Indiegogo is one of my favorites. It's I think it was before, and I think it still is. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a keep what you raise model. So unlike Indiegogo. So unlike Kickstarter, it's another really big one. Unlike Kickstarter, and it's not limited to creatives, Indiegogo is open to just all sorts of people with all sorts of ideas. It doesn't necessarily need to be a creative idea. It's another one of the big ones. And I think it's a keep what you raise model as opposed to a only keep it if you reach this target. At least it used to be, and I'm pretty sure it still is. There is, I'm just going to throw out some examples. There are literally hundreds, especially if you go international, hundreds of these crowd backing websites now that use either reward models or some are straight donation for nonprofits, etc. Another one, Start Some Good, which focuses on you have to be somehow a social change kind of idea. And they use a tipping point model of funding, so you can ask for, say, $20,000, but your tipping point maybe is $6,000. So if you get more than $6,000, you get to keep that money, and you don't actually have to reach your $20,000 goal. So some people have set it up that way. Crowd Tilt is more of a crowdsourcing idea. You may not have heard of Crowd Tilt. Crowd Tilt's
Actually, what was the name of the previous one, sorry?
Indiegogo.
No, after that.
Oh, Start Some Good.
And we'll put all these up on the Cake blog too if you want to grab them from there. As well
I mean, these are just some examples I pulled on my head because they illustrate how many different models there are, but there are literally dozens more. I think Indiegogo and Kickstarter are the two biggest that I know of off the top of my head, but the numbers change a lot. Kickstarter obviously is the hugest and just dwarfs everybody else pretty much in the U.S. So Crowd Tilt kind of operates more like crowds. Remember Cards from Friends? Excuse me, operates more like Cards from Friends. You remember I was talking earlier about how crowdsourcing kind of acts like you get on the phone and you ask for everybody to support your birthday party. Crowd Tilt looks like that for a lot of their projects. They want to do something like a birthday party. A lot of professional projects as well. But then they'll email out virtual cards to say friends and family, and that's how they start getting together some of their money. There was another famous one called ProFounder. Has anybody ever heard of ProFounder?
Yep.
Yeah, ProFounder was another one that kind of ran into some problems and tried to head them out at the pass. They've changed their model substantially, I think, because they were actually trying to do equity investments. So remember, the big difference we want to keep in mind here, this kind of bridge, is when you hit securities, when you're actually giving somebody money with the expectation they'll use it and then make money for you, a return on your investment. The donation sites and the reward sites don't actually do that. It's really more of a pre-purchase. So you're not engaged in the sale of securities. Unlike Prosper, where because you're making money, you're making a return on your money, you are engaged in the sale of securities. This is the big difference. So when you do things on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, you're not selling securities. And that's pretty well established. You don't need to worry that by getting on those sites you're selling securities, unless your reward, for example, is something like, well, if you give money to my company and I do well, I will give you a 10% return on your money, okay? Then one of your rewards would actually be selling a security, and now you're in a lot of trouble. So, you know, I'm an attorney, so I'm very risk averse, so I say, clear all your rewards with your attorney. But really, if you just use some common sense, you're going to avoid giving a reward that looks like anything like some sort of equity investment. If you just stick with t-shirts or stick with actually selling your product, that's fine. You're going to be safe for your reward. ProFounder had some problems because they actually wanted people to invest as like an equity investment. Some statistics. So Congress looked at all these services, and the studies looked at all these services, and then Congress started considering the Jobs Act or McGee Act. And it's amazing. I mean, this was passed in April 5 of 2012, so it's amazing with everything else going on in the country that we've had going on, Congress could actually get together and pass anything like this and do it without necessarily pork barreling the stuffing out of it, right? And instead, it turned out to be a pretty nice, although people always argue about what's the right balance and is it really good or not. We'll get into more of that later. But Europe has had equity crowdfunding for a long time. So equity crowdfunding now means you're going to have a service that lets you put $20 into a business and expect to get, 5% of a return or 15% of a return. In other words, it's just like kind of when you invest in stocks and you expect to get a return out of the stock whose company you bought. You're buying stock in a company when you do equity crowdfunding. It's just going to be very small amounts. And so, generally, if I'm going to invest $35 in a local company, honestly, I'm not too concerned about whether I get $350 back or not. But it opens up that kind of equity investment, which opens up, a huge market for people to put more money into local businesses. There are going to be some caps and things on that. But Europe, the question is then people have, well, if we already have Kickstarter and whatnot, is this really effective? Is it going to actually create any money coming to small businesses? One of my favorite sites is crowdsourcing.org, and they do a whole lot of studies about crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and whatnot, more on an international scale. They did a study on equity for Europe of closed crowdfunding deals where they did equity crowdfunding, and then they looked and saw, all right, how much percent of one that actually got funded was between, say, 50 and 100,000 K, or 50K and 100K, 26%. 100K to 250K, 21%. This is a huge amount of money. Less than 250K, 21%. All right. So we're seeing really big dollar signs from equity crowdfunding in the Europe market, which has been doing this now. They're ahead of the U.S. They've been doing this for a while. And if you go online and you start looking at equity crowdfunding on Google, you're probably going to bump into sites from the UK. Do not list your U.S. company on sites for foreign crowdfunding. You need to comply with U.S. laws. You accept foreign crowdfunding, you're just opening a whole bag of worms. Just don't go there. You need to wait until we actually get the U.S. crowdfunding out of the gate. So the question is, when does, and if I'm going too fast or I'm talking too fast, you have questions, just jump in, interrupt me, and ask. Question is, when does U.S. crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding start? When does all this kind of happen? When does the gates open to this new kind of equity investing as opposed to just donation or reward-based investing? On April 5th, when the law passed, they said that the SEC had 270 days to promulgate special rules regarding on how this is going to work. So the SEC does seem to be taking its sweet time in getting out the rules. I think they've promulgated some first drafts of some proposed rules that they now have open for comment, all right, for crowd portals, and how crowd portals will kind of be a go-between between, say, you, the person who wants investment, and all these investors who want to give your small business money. So we're probably not going to see all this happen until, gosh, sometime next year, hopefully early next year, but the SEC doesn't even have to have final rules out until, somebody do the math, 270, April, is that like January? It's sometime in January, I guess. Yeah, sometime in January of next year. But that amount of time is a great amount of time that you have to get your company ready for equity crowdfunding. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and get into exactly what you need to do to prepare your company for equity crowdfunding. Okay, some of the requirements, some of the things you might want to look at if you've got a company, say even an LLC or something, and you want to take it maybe in a equity crowdfunding direction. What do you need to do to get ready? So before I segue into the actual requirements of the Jobs Act for this kind of stuff, does anybody have any questions about more the Kickstarter or donation or reward-based stuff?
Specifically, just what you said last, are you saying that until they make those rules, like the law itself is not actually...
Right, it's not, you're not actually going to be able to do any equity crowdfunding until sometime next year when all this stuff hits. What you can do right now is start getting your business ready for it, and there is actually a fair amount of stuff to do to get ready. So if you're looking to do it and not be in a rush, now's a good time to kind of get your ducks in a row. Shoot.
Is there, in terms of the SEC...
Anybody need anything? I'll just do it like that.
That was my question. Does anybody need anything?
In terms of the FCC, does anybody need
No,
anything?
SEC.
Don't get me started on the FCC, but they try. I love how they try with the bandwidth thing.
What was your question?
So, but my question is, in terms of as they're working out this rulemaking, proposed rulemaking, and so forth, do they have a portal set up in order to kind of like watch as things are unfolding, or to comment on things? Or is there
Great. Oh, and actually to do the comments.
or just to kind of like
Watch
it, but even to provide commentary.
I wish they had a better way of doing it. Unfortunately, they're a government agency that's somewhat closed and obtuse, and certainly a lot of information is public, and you could do a Freedom of Information Act request if you wanted to and get a lot. And there are agencies that do that to find out what's going on. The SEC is fairly public in what they do. I mean, when they ask, say, these new rules are open for public comment, they put it on their website and say, here are the proposed rules for public comment, but the proposed rules are usually dense and full of regulations, so unless you know what, Section 4 of the Act is, you're just going to be like, oh God, what does all this mean? So you're going to want to filter this kind of stuff through some sort of news site. Now, if you go and you Google just crowdfunding news, here's the danger. Everybody and their brother, okay, let me explain first. One of the requirements to do equity crowdfunding is that it all has to go through a crowdfunding portal, a middleman, an internet portal that is going to control all of the money that's coming to you. So all of this investor money that you want to get a hold of first goes through the portal and then goes to you. Why do we do it that way? Well, we're trying to get a hold on fraud so we don't have this kind of...
Who runs the portal?
Oh, so who runs the portal? So the portal is going to be run by just private individuals who are setting up these portals. A lot of them are people with legal backgrounds. A lot of them are just people who have sophisticated business backgrounds like venture capitalists and folks like that. The people who run these portals, but here's the problem. Everybody and their brother right now is trying to run a portal. You have hundreds of startups which are all like, I'm going to be the next big portal. And you also have some established people who will probably do this too. For example, I would expect maybe Gust or AngelList, if anyone's familiar with those two, to do this kind of stuff. Let me stop for a second then, because I got a couple of looks like, who are these people? Gust and AngelList help match small startup businesses with financial investors. AngelList is reportedly angels. I think Gust is both angels and venture capital. I like Gust's website. You can actually go onto their website, and I think there's like a thing labeled education that you can click. And they actually have some really good materials for if you're starting a business or you have an idea, for kind of helping you get your feet on the ground and and look at some of your capital options, especially VC or angel related. So a lot of established players in this space are probably going to be trying to do crowdfunding portals as well. But here's the problem. You just go search crowdfunding news on Google, and you're basically going to find a bunch of sites who are trying to control the SEO on crowdfunding news so that they can essentially have what looks like a really great news article on crowdfunding, and then it's going to be like, and you should go to my portal, to do this, right? And it's going to try and funnel you to their portal. Obviously, the person with the best SEO is probably going to do some decent business, probably. You never really can predict these things too well. But you want to be careful of that news source. So to get news on what's going on with equity crowdfunding as we get into the first quarter of next year, or as we get into the last quarter of this year and this stuff starts working itself out, you want to stick with a news source that you already kind of trust. And gosh, I think I've written down crowdsourcing.org is pretty good. Let me see, I've got another one written down here somewhere. I think it's The Venturist or something like that. But basically, whatever is established news portal for entrepreneurs that's been around for long before we had all this crowdfunding stuff, just stick with that news outlet, and that's going to filter the news for you and get you what you need to know. Also, all of us who are involved in this legal space are ridiculously excited about it. I've been talking a mile a minute, and I think I haven't even stopped, and God knows how much time. How much time have I used?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. And I haven't paused once, have I? I love this stuff. And honestly, it's going to be a huge difference for local companies having this ability to do this kind of equity financing. It's going to be great.
Quick question too before you get into that one. I know that at least one other company before had been trying to get around the equity rule by doing profit sharing or revenue sharing, essentially with their crowdfunding.
Did they get sued yet?
The last I checked, they took it down maybe 6 months ago or something like that because they were not able to continue on with that track.
Generally, the SEC has been fairly generous. It hasn't, for example, tried to label Kickstarter as a broker or as some sort of equity platform or exchange that would actually have to register with the SEC and jump through all these hoops. Prosper was the example where they felt that it was going too far and obviously selling a security, so they had to act. But the SEC generally has been pretty nice when it comes to crowdfunding and regulation. As far as I'm aware, maybe somebody else has other experiences to share about this, or other attorneys out there have had some difficulties. But they seem to be doing pretty well with the crowdfunding. But people who play games, are going to get burned because there's a lot of attention on this space, and if you play games with this stuff,
so pretty much no. Anything that's even looking like equity,
you don't want
that same
to.
revenue
You don't want to.
sharing.
You don't want to.
Yeah, that was
you don't
kind of
want
what
to
I was
play.
thinking.
You don't want to play games with it. You really don't. And the fees are ridiculous. And just like playing games with your tax returns will eventually, if the IRS audits you, they'll go back several years and say, oh, and you misdeclared this, so now you have to pay interest and penalties on X, and all of a sudden your small business is paying all of its money to the IRS for interest and penalties, and then you're going to see somebody about doing a bankruptcy file, and you're like, can I Chapter 7 my business? And I don't know, somewhere a bell rings and an angel gets his wings. I don't know. Which somehow the VCs seem to operate that way with their exit strategies. I don't like how exit strategy. Now I'm segueing. I don't like how exit.
I totally derailed you with that question.
Sorry, I don't like how exit strategy is becoming necessarily a part of every business plan. I do for people who want to sell a business in 3 to 5 years. If that's your plan, is to start a business and sell it, have an exit strategy. If you want an exit strategy to get VC capital, that's sad, and it makes me want to cry. Who's asking a question?
Yeah, I guess I was going back to Kickstarter and saying, are nonprofits finding that to be a pretty viable source compared to your traditional grants from organizations, or I wonder what kind of a ratio they're
I'm
getting
not
on that.
sure. I don't think I've ever seen a report or data on that, on nonprofits trying to use Kickstarter for various things, or even some sort of subsidiary of a nonprofit trying to use it for something. I'd be interested in seeing data on that. I'm sorry, I don't actually know the figures on that one. There are some, like I said, crowdfunding sites which are donation-based specifically for nonprofits, which means you actually do donations instead of pre-purchases. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted to, you could still set up rewards. I mean, NPR, for example, sets up reward programs, right? When they're doing their pledge drive and call in and say, I got this great CD or this hat or whatever they do. It irritates me because it always interrupts car talk when I'm trying to listen to it. It's like one of my favorite shows.
So what's a good
It's so sad. They're stopping car talk.
Okay, now we're way off.
I did cry.
what's a good donation-based website then?
Oh gosh, let me see if I have one written down here. I guess Start Some Good probably. Maybe is a good one. I don't necessarily think I have a specific nonprofit one written down here. You may have to research that one. 33 Needs, I think, is only for-profits that are trying to do social change, but that's another kind of popular one.
33 what?
33 Needs, but I think that may only be for-profits. If you go into crowdsourcing, I think they have huge lists of these.
Okay.
And in fact, I think they list over 452 active platforms. And this is even before we start this huge launch into U.S. equity crowdfunding where, like I say, who knows how many portals we're going to have spring up and try and offer something in this space. So the idea is when you're getting news, be very aware right now of the source. Be aware that everybody and their brother and their sister is fighting to get these, to be the crowd portal, because there's tons of money on the line. There's tons of control. And unfortunately that sometimes causes bad business practices as well, which again is what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid having this, this era that then spawned the New Deal where we had all sorts of fraud. And now with technology, with the world being as close as it is, we think we can get back to local stock exchanges, but having more due diligence, right? And having more controls, and having crowdfunding portals, one of their duties is going to be to do due diligence on companies, make sure it's a real company and not somebody out of Vegas registered in, say, Oregon as a foreign corporation who, is floating some sort of shares and some weird equity deal that just overnight disappears, right? You want to avoid all that, which even happens sometimes on the pink sheets. I don't know, does anybody do OTB or pink sheets or anything like that?
You just made an interesting connection. So you're saying a crowdfunding website is pretty much a local stock exchange?
That's what I would like to see happen to a certain extent. It's not. Crowdfunding portals are going to be national, pretty much every single one of them. But just like Kickstarter, you can go onto Kickstarter and you can put in Portland, Oregon in the search, or you can put in, you can put in Eugene, Oregon, or you can put in Pendleton, Oregon, or Hines, or whatever, and you're going to get local projects, right? I love just putting in the word Oregon and getting projects. I funded a, gosh, I'm not sure where the circus is. I funded a circus, I think it was down in Bend or something recently, because I'm just like, wow, these folks are putting together a circus on Kickstarter. How cool is that? So I just gave them like $30 or something like that. Someone did a kids book. I'm not sure where that was. Maybe it was down in Ashland or something. But it's great. You can get local projects. And the idea is hopefully we'll see local investing. Because honestly, if you have an opportunity to invest, and there are some figures and some studies that show people prefer to keep those dollars local when they can, which makes sense. Especially if you tie it in with, say, people who want crowdfunding and they're putting up ads and things in their local space. And we'll get more on that in a minute. So let me hop back right now because now I'm starting to get a little spread out. I should bring us back to your actual requirements if you want your company to do equity crowdfunding, okay? So this is kind of going to be a list. We'll talk about it in a second. You can write it down if you want. I'll probably do it.
on cake as well, so you guys can.
And it's recorded,
access to it, yeah.
And I'll probably do a checklist too that I'm going to roll out here on my own website, OregonStartup.com. I have a thing for B Corps and L3Cs, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. And I'll probably be putting up some articles on equity crowdfunding along with some checklists and things so you can start getting your business ready. But here are the things you're going to be required. You're going to have to list all your directors and officers and 20% of your holders. Now, I just said directors and officers. So you can kind of glom onto the fact that if you want to do equity crowdfunding, it's going to be shares. People are going to be buying shares of, not your company, but your corporation. This means the big first requirement to doing equity crowdfunding, if you want to capture these dollars, is to have a corporate model. So if you're an LLC right now and you want to do this, that means you need to think about changing to a corporate model. And you can start with an S corporation. You won't be able to do equity crowdfunding with an S corporation because your limits on the amount of shareholders, I think it's 100 or something like that, and you only can have one class of shares. Okay, and I'll talk more about that in a second. I think that's fine for equity. Having one class of shares, I think, is fine for equity crowdfunding. I'll get into that in a second. But the point is, if you want to do this, you need to switch from LLC to a corporate model. And we're not quite ready to go, so you may elect Chapter S status, and then you'll flip from Chapter S taxation to regular C Corp when you're close to your time to be ready to go. So that can save you some money on some tax short term while you're still gearing up. But so now you've magically changed your LLC, which a lot of people, especially small businesses, are because until you're making enough money already that you're ready to switch to an S corporation, you're probably an LLC for tax purposes. Eventually, you're making, I don't know, like $250,000 a year, and you're like, oh wow, if I switch to an S corporation, I could pay myself a dividend, and I just save a lot of money on my taxes. So you switch to an S corporation, and then you don't have to pay self-employment tax on the intent. And that's a complicated topic, so talk to your CPA and figure out if you want to do that. I'm just saying, in the life of a business, eventually there's a moment where it usually switches from an LLC to corporation. A lot of CPAs, because of their training, are often more comfortable anyway with S corporations. So I get a lot of clients who come in and actually right out of the gate, rather than do an LLC, they want to do an S corporation, and I always ask them, you have a CPA, and 100% of the time it's yes. So I know somewhere in the CPA training out there, it's like, thou shalt do S corporations instead of LLCs or something. So now you have your S corporation. What you need to do, these are all, shoot.
Do you recommend starting with an LLC as opposed to a corporation? Is it something that makes sense? Is it a natural evolution, or?
It has been in the past, I think, a natural evolution. It really depends on your specific situation, on how much money you want to start with, on whether you want to have, say, brick and mortar stores in more than one state, and just a whole lot of things going into how many employees are you going to have. There are sometimes tax advantages to doing a corporation if you have employees and you're doing some health benefits and some other kind of benefits. Well, it's kind of a complicated calculus, but if you're doing a kind of more of a micro-product approach where you just want to get some liability protection while you sell your product online, and you start an LLC and you're doing the sole member LLC as opposed to a partnership LLC with a bunch of people, then yeah, it's a natural evolution to start as an LLC and go to a corporation later. And they're not expensive. I mean, lawyers will do these conversions for not too much. You can look on my website and get an idea of some of the rates for things. Add an extra $50 to $100 onto my usual rate for formation because you're dealing with records that already exist. But it is a natural evolution. So now we have this other thing in the calculus, which is a question I need now to ask my clients who are starting businesses, brand new, which is, now we have this equity crowdfunding that's coming out. Do you want to use this tool? Do you want to plan for this tool? So it all comes back partially to having a good business plan. So when you first start your business, you need to now consider where you want to go from it, or where your capital comes from. You may not want to do equity crowdfunding of any sort. Since you asked the question, I will jump, in fact, to that topic. All right? Let's talk about when you want to do it. So, in fact, maybe it's helpful to talk about when you don't want to do it. Okay? So if you have plenty of money, why would you give up equity in your company if you already have tons of money to do your business idea? Well, maybe you could say it's because I want to generate buzz. Well, there are other ways of generating buzz, other social media, where you're not actually giving up equity in your company. Keep in mind, equity is ownership of your company. I think what most lawyers would advise is you never want to give up equity if you don't have to, right? So if you have plenty of money, maybe not. If you only want to do it because, well, even if you have plenty of money, you just want more money, okay? That's equally the wrong reason. You should never seek things like equity crowdfunding or VC capital or even a bank loan just because you want more money. That doesn't make sense. And in fact, banks and VCs and even theoretically crowd portals won't let you get any crowdfunding portals won't let you get any money if you just want more money. You need to actually have a business idea. I'm sorry, it's the truth. You want to have a business idea or a plan saying, I want this money to expand my business, or I need this money because here's my prototype and I want to build a lot more of my prototype. Okay, some sort of plan, some sort of target for the money. Once you give away that equity, it's not entirely your business anymore, right? And now you have all these other people who are involved who, in the case of equity crowdfunding or Kickstarter or any of the donation-based crowd, I keep saying crowdfunding, I should say crowd backing so that I keep the two straight. You have to communicate with tons of people. And in fact, you have product fulfillment for tons of people too. Keep that in mind. So all of a sudden now, let's say you have 2,000 people who respond to your Kickstarter. You're going to have to communicate with 2,000 people. This is okay if you're technologically inclined and you can set up mailing lists and databases and you're cool with it. Or if you have a product fulfillment center who you can kind of push off all the packaging and whatnot. But if you're not as technologically into some of that stuff to communicate with your crowd, all right, or you're going to have trouble just with the product fulfillment because it's way too much to ship and you're not comfortable getting a product fulfillment, or you haven't priced for potentially having to have a product fulfillment center, okay, when you did those rewards, you have a full-time job, right? You're too busy to do it. you need to take those things into consideration and say, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing Kickstarter. And again, this is more of a concern for someone who is, say, a solo LLC, because there's a lot of work and you may still have your day job. If a corporation sounds too complicated and you're happy with your LLC and you're comfortable there, don't stress yourself out. If you're comfortable with your business, and a lot of people, business is about lifestyle business. I think we just we were just at a talk at Powell's for the $100 startup, great fun book, and it's a lot about how people go into business because they want the freedom that comes with being your own boss, and it talks a lot about doing your passion and turning it into a business where you have more time for yourself, like you go on vacation whenever you want. Wonderful. You start getting involved in some of this crowdfunding material, all of a sudden you're spending more time product fulfillment, product development, communicating. Some of your freedom goes away because now you have obligations and you have promises to keep. Was it before we started this talk that I gave the lockpick example? Okay, so let me cover that. So there was a guy on Kickstarter who said he had custom designed a whole bunch of lockpicks, and he's a member of a lock sport organization, and he gets I forget how much it was, like $60,000-$80,000 or something like that, and he said on his Kickstarter he's got a CAD file, he'll send it to manufacturing, he'll give everybody their lockpicks, and then he didn't send them, and instead, allegedly, I don't know how much of this is true or not, so allegedly he went on a world tour of some sort, and the money got spent, and nobody got their products. That's a problem. In fact, if you do that kind of stuff, in equity crowdfunding, certainly you're going to get sued. In fact, if it's equity, you're probably going to get some sort of minority shareholder or some sort of class action suit or something like that. Don't be that person. Even on Kickstarter, however, if you read their terms of service, they say that you have to, if you make a promise, either refund the money or go through with that promise. So think about things like product fulfillment and whether you need a product fulfillment center when you do this, or whether you need to bring on an employee or an independent contractor or what have you. If you do an employee, you can just get a payroll center to take care of your taxes and things of that nature. So these are all things to think about. If there's traditional equity available, maybe rather than do crowdfunding equity and have to deal with, 100 people, 1,000 people, inevitably some of them are not going to be happy with what you're doing. Some of them are going to be naysayers. Some of the people are going to be like, well, you came out with this great product, but I always, I'm left-handed, and I think it should be designed for lefties, or maybe a special product for lefties, right? That wasn't a pun. That kind of stuff is going to come up. You can't make everybody happy with what you're doing. People are going to complain. And it's quite possibly when you have all these shareholders, somebody in their complaining is going to sue you. So it's a consideration. If you use traditional equity, you're dealing with 3 or 4 people, right? So you're dealing with a lot smaller people, a lot of whom are going to be more professional about their demands and their needs. And maybe you're just more comfortable with that. Likewise, whether you're doing any sort of equity investment, any sort of capital investment, you need advisors, okay? You probably need an attorney. You definitely need a CPA. There's no question on that one. So find your local neighborhood CPA, and they'll be thrilled to work with you. And a lot of them are really inexpensive. And the best way to find a CPA generally is to come to meetings like this, where there are a lot of small business people, and just start asking them, who's your CPA? And they'll probably say, oh, my CPA is X, and either X is not so good, go to somebody else, or X is fantastic. And they go the extra mile, and you should use X. That's usually the best way to find good people. So all those are considerations about whether you want to do equity crowdfunding in the first place.
So kind of it seems like then crowdfunding, like equity crowdfunding, even though it seems like you're not going as crazy in depth trying to get this money from the sharks, like you say, you still just need to make sure you have your business ducks all in a row. It sounds like you just kind of need to take it from that, if you're a sole proprietor, let's say, or even just a single member LLC. Just really need to take it to the next step organizationally and make sure you're ready to deal with some shit is kind of the...
if you just have an idea and it's just a dream and you stick it on Kickstarter, that can work sometimes, but it's just as likely to get you into trouble because you haven't necessarily planned out all that fulfillment or planned out how you bring it to market or planned out those costs. So, maybe that's not the best time to do it. In fact, it's not the best time to do it. You probably want to, like you said, get all your ducks in a row. You do want to get all your ducks in a row. You probably want to have a prototype product before you start doing it so you know how much the manufacturing cost is going to be. Have quotes. Okay, have everything planned out. You don't need to do that alone. Small Business Development Center in town, here in Portland, down in Salem, down in Eugene. Roseburg has a really good one. There are people who are going to help you. Score online. Does everybody know Score? Does anybody use Score? Okay, SCORE is the Society or something of retired executives, and what they do essentially is a lot of really experienced people who help you for free. They don't charge you anything. Why on earth would you not go talk to the SCORE people? They're experts in just about anything you want to do, and they talk to you for free. So go talk to SCORE and let them help you plan things out. The other idea, the other issue you want to consider is, is your idea ready to be made public? I think everybody here knows, and if you've done any small business or you've done any micro product, you've done any startups, you kind of already know that it's not so much about having a brilliant idea, because everybody in the world has brilliant ideas. It's actually about getting your brilliant idea off paper, where thousands of brilliant ideas, many of them the same, even though you think it's unique and no one else in the world has thought of it because you're just that amazing. Other people probably have a very similar idea, and then it's online first. You're like, oh, they stole my idea, I should sue them. No, because we live in a capitalist culture. Go off on a tangent again. It's about the execution, right? So for most people, going public on whether it's Kickstarter or these new equity crowdfunding sites is going to be okay. There are some exceptions. Maybe you have some trade secret issues which are somehow in the design of the product itself, and you don't really want to reveal that until you're have a deal to be in stores or some sort of licensing agreement, or a lot of things could go on for your situation. So you need to evaluate that whole publicity issue as well. So now let's jump back to where I was just saying with the actual requirements. And this is, again, more legalese. I wish I had more jokes built in here because, I'm talking legalese, and you can't see this on the web, but I've, a couple yawns, a couple, oh my God, how long is the lawyer going to prattle? The answer is, how am I doing right now? 10 minutes? Well, we may go over 10 minutes, so I hope nobody has to run away. I'll try not to take too long. This is the list of requirements. So let's say you want to do equity crowdfunding. You're a good fit for equity crowdfunding, and you want to be part of your business while you have the corporation. Okay. The first thing you're going to need to do is when you list your offer, essentially, of how much money you want and what shares you're selling at what price. And I think I wrote this down in a more clever way, or we have some sort of handout to give out here in a minute that'll discuss it. You need to tell, and you're going to do this through the crowdfunding portal. In fact, you have to do it through the crowdfunding portal, who your directors are, who your officers are. Sometimes this will be the same people. You may be both the director and the president. In other cases, you may be on the board of directors and have a CEO who's appointed by the board of directors. Generally, you have a president, and you have a secretary, and you have some sort of board of directors. If you're a nonprofit, you definitely have a lot of these things. If you're just a small corporation, you may be the director, president, and secretary all in one, and that's fine too. You're going to need to reveal anyone who has 20% of your company. Okay, that can be tough. I've started some businesses where 20% is owned by mom and dad. And that doesn't necessarily sound the most professional when you're listing on an equity site. So you may want to consider, I need to list 20% holders, and if you don't want mom and dad listed, maybe they want to be silent investors, maybe you should see that they're down at 15% instead of 20%, right? Very simple. You're going to need to say what your purpose is, what your price is. You're going to need to reveal your capital structure is another big one. Capital structure, so let's talk about shares for a second. When you set up a corporation, and you set up shares, one of the things you list when you set up your corporation is how many shares your corporation is authorized to issue. Usually this is a big number, especially if you intend on ever selling shares. So you may make it 10,000, 20,000. Some people advise like 100,000, more than 100,000. You want to look into the future and see ultimately how many shares you want to sell. When you want to sell shares, you do what's called issue them. So let's say you set up something with, I'm going to make it really easy, say it's 10,000 shares. You immediately issue 6,000 or so, give them to yourself as the founding member. Now you own 60% you actually own 100% of your company, because your amount of ownership is measured against how many shares you have issued. But what you've done is, because you're only authorized to ever issue 10,000, you've guaranteed that even if you issue the other 4, you're always going to own at least 60% of your company. And when you do your bylaws, you're probably going to write some anti-dilution stuff in there, and your attorney will take care of that. When you set up a corporation, you definitely need to hire an attorney to write up your basic documents. So you have that capital structure set up of how much your authorized shares, how many are issued. A term sheet, you hear this topic a lot when you talk about capital. A term sheet is essentially just something that says what your capital structure is and what it should be for this particular deal or sale of stock. So it's going to list things like what classes of stock are there. Stock can become in many varieties, such as preferred stock or common stock. Preferred stock is something that venture capitalists ask for because generally if you have preferred stock, it's going to be defined to mean that, say if the company goes bankrupt, preferred stock is going to get paid out first, things of that nature. Preferred stock may get dividends that common stock doesn't. When you list for your equity crowdfunding, you need to list all those things. You need to list how your company is valued. You need to list what the risks are of being a minority shareholder, including the potential for being diluted. In other words, right now, let's say you issue 2,000 more shares out of your 10,000. Now you have minority shareholders who own 20% of your company, but what happens if you issue 20 more shares? Okay. Now all of a sudden, you're measuring. Oh, excuse me. So if you have what percentage is
2/6.
2/6? Thank you.
1/3.
2/6 or 2/8. 2/8 in this case, or 1/4. So they'll own 25%. Now, if you go ahead and you issue the remaining shares so that you have 10,000, your maximum issued, now all of a sudden they own 20%. They've just been diluted, right? So you need to write in that risk in there so they know that that risk exists. You need to decide whether you're going to have multiple classes of stock and whether you're going to have preferred stock and common stock. When you do an S corporation, you only have one class of stock. And generally, you can certainly do equity crowdfunding with only one class of stock. That means when you issue a dividend, everybody gets the dividend. Great. I think that's really fair. I think that's fine. Some investors, if you want to get venture capital, are going to demand things like preferred stock. You don't necessarily need to worry about that if you're going to crowdfunding rather than you're doing it to avoid venture capital. You need to have, like I said, you need to have a plan for what you do with the money. You need to look and see how much money you want to raise in a 12-month period. This is also key. You're going to have a much easier time raising under $100,000 using equity crowdfunding because all you need to do is issue a financial statement. As far as financial statements goes, is all you need to do. Issue a financial statement about the worth of your company that a CEO has signed off on. Okay. Very simple to do. But if you want to get $100,000 to $500,000, you need a financial statement that a CPA has gone over and approved. If you have your friendly neighborhood CPA, this is really easy. And they may just, they're probably going to issue you a financial statement for really inexpensively. That's simple to do. If you want to get more than $500,000 in a 12-month period, you actually need to be professionally audited. Even for small companies, a professional audit could easily run you $5,000, $8,000, $10,000. Okay, so it's very expensive. Now again, if you're looking to get more than $500,000, the idea is, well, you're already probably pretty sophisticated. You're probably looking to expand and not just get startup capital. So it's probably something you can do. You're allowed through equity crowdfunding to get a maximum of $1 million over a 12-month period. Also, when you do equity crowdfunding, and let's say you end up with 1,000 investors, these 1,000 investors don't count towards what's considered sort of your public company cap, or a cap where you'd have to start making disclosures to the SEC. Ordinarily, if you get enough investors, you have to start disclosing stuff to the SEC. It used to be that was a low number. Right now, thanks to the Jobs Act, one of the things they did is they upped that cap so that you're not likely to really ever reach it anymore. For some investments, it's up there around 2,000 or something. But the point is, equity crowdfunders don't count to that cap. So you can get as many equity crowdfunders as you want without having them measure to then what makes you a public company. You're limited also in how much investors can give you. So if an investor, it used to be when you wanted to make investments, you had to be something called a, God, why did this word just go out of my head? Accredited, sophisticated, yes, or an accredited investor, which essentially means you have to have more than a net worth of more than $1 million or income for more than $200,000 in the past 2 years. There are a couple other ways to get there too. Like if you're a banking institution or something, you can be an accredited investor. And part of that's to prevent fraud. We expect that people with a lot of money who are more sophisticated will be able to protect themselves or hire other people probably to protect them from people who want to take their money. Folks who earn less have a tougher time doing that. It's not even necessarily that they're less sophisticated. There are some very sophisticated people who dedicate their lives to doing wonderful nonprofit causes. Very sophisticated. And it probably insults them to be lumped in as a non-accredited investor. But we have a very paternalistic approach to investing in the United States. It raises a lot of barriers for putting money into things. And one of those is that accredited investor barrier. But not for crowdfunding, not for equity crowdfunding. Instead, they have a rule that says if you make less than $100,000 a year, you're limited to giving to kind of your entire portfolio of crowdfund investments $2,000 or 5% of your annual income. If you're making more than $100,000, you can give 10% of your annual income up to a maximum of $100,000, which is, of course, $1 million, and that's the cap anyway, right? So that makes sense. So basically, if you're making more than $100,000, we're kind of just assuming that you're going to be able to take care of yourself. We already talked about some of the crowdfunding portals you're going to be doing all this stuff through. You're going to be doing things like issuing an annual report, okay, to all your shareholders. You're going to have to do that anyway, more or less, under state law, just as having a corporation. It's one of those hoops you have to jump through. While you're getting money, because again, some of these crowdfunding portals are probably going to do something where if you don't reach a target, then you don't get funding and all the money goes back. That makes sense. They're probably going to organize it like Kickstarter. Why not? It's a very successful model. If I were starting a crowdfunding portal, I'd want it to look a lot like Kickstarter. I'd probably even try and put rewards and things in there if I could do it. You have to keep people who are trying to buy equity from you updated on how close you're getting to your target. You also can only advertise, this is a really important one, you can only advertise your equity crowdfunding opportunity in order to send people to the portal. In other words, you can't give a ton of information like we're selling this much and we expect to make millions and you're going to make a huge return of 100% on your money, guaranteed. You can't do that. You're not a late night infomercial. All you can do is say, hey, we have this offering. It's over here on this crowdfunding portal. Go check us out. Then somebody's going to go to the crowdfunding portal. They're going to read the details. And remember, the crowdfunding portal is doing the due diligence on you as a company and making sure you're not defrauding people. So that's kind of the reason for that rule. Okay, so let me jump ahead. There's a lot of other stuff in the actual Jobs Act, as they call it, in the Key Bill. There's some stuff in there that's really even more exciting than crowdfunding, based on what's called 506 securities. 506 is kind of an exception to having to do some of the SEC stuff. It's a special filing you can make for some investors who used to be accredited, who are still accredited investors, and essentially lets you advertise to these people when you couldn't before. So I don't know if anyone here has done 506 or knows about 506 security offerings or anything. Well, so I'm not going to go too much into that, but it's really cool. And if you are in fact a startup and you're looking at private equity, you're now going to be able to advertise for equity in ways you couldn't before. So I'd recommend, if that interests you, you go get on places like Gust or AngelList, or even talk to some of the incubators we have in town, because they're probably all over that. And it makes it a lot easier to hook up equity for startups. So it's a good time not just to be a small business, maybe looking at doing equity crowdfunding, but also just to be a startup looking at venture capital of any sort. So really quick, I think some of this is written in, are we going to move on to the worksheet now?
Yeah.
We're going to take a break first.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been talking a long time. I apologize to people on the web. Again, I'm a lawyer. What can I do? It's legal information. I hope it's been a little bit helpful. L3Cs and B Corps, I'd still like to hit a bit if we're still on camera when we come back. Let's take a break.
Okay, great. We'll
A lot of
come
people
back
have had a lot
in
of
another,
beer.
like 5 or 10 minutes. We also have a little worksheet which I'll pass out right now. Thanks for tackling this huge topic first of all, because it is really crazy, and just trying to shove that into a small talk is awesome.
Clearly, I need to get more humor. It started out with a lot of laughter and ended with lots of yawns. I'm sorry.
We'll take a little 5 or 10 minute break here. This is a little worksheet that we drew up for the workshop portion. Summarizes a lot of the info too, if you want kind of just like a quick digestible version of a lot of this stuff. And we'll go over L3Cs, the B Corp stuff when you get back, and then hop into some questions probably. And then if we have time, we'll actually tackle workshopping through one of your businesses as well.
Key takeaways, if you're looking to do this, just looking getting to that corporate structure. That's what you're going to need is a corporation that's kind of designed to be good for small businesses, but